Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, where we take up the articles from the Hindu and discuss them as per the demands of Civil Services Examination. The topics of the discussion are listed on your screen. Moving on to the first article of the day that has featured on page 9 of the Hindu, basically talks about the Ground Zero report from Tamil Nadu. Now this particular article highlights the miseries of the tribal communities of the Tamil Nadu, which they are facing due to the relocation plan of the government. Through this article, we'll try to understand what are the ethical issues involved in the case, why the relocation and the rehabilitation plan of the particular tribal communities have been facing several challenges in this case, and what are the ethical issues arising from it. Now we need to understand the ethical issues from the case point of GS4 syllabus, as it can be asked as a case study in examination also, wherein it can be asked that what are the ethical issues that are involved in such relocation plan, or when the relocation and the rehabilitation does not go as per the promises of the government of the day. What ethical issues does it generate? So the ethical issues that can be understood from here, and where the first ethical issue is the lack of trust in the government. Now, as per the case study highlighted under this article, locals have said that neither the forest department nor them, that is the tribal community, have benefited from the relocation scheme. Only a few corrupt officials and the middlemen have profited from the funds. These funds were earmarked for the Adivasis or the tribal communities, but these have been siphoned off by the corrupt officials and the middlemen. And thus this has raised a point of question in the minds of the tribals or the Adivasi community that were residing in this area, that whether they should trust anything that the government says or promises in the future. So basically this highlights that a trust or the public trust on which basically any government or democracy survives has been breached in this case. It is to remember here that the government has lost the trust, and the office of any government is an office of trust. And if this basic sanctity of public trust is lost, it is very difficult to ensure accountable and responsible government towards the demands or the aspirations of the people. The second ethical issue that can be highlighted here is the violation of right to religious freedom. Now in this particular case, people or the Adivasis who have been residing in this area fear that once they leave the area, the forest department might not allow them or stop them from visiting the age-old temples and to offer their prayers there. And this highlights the case where the right to religious freedom, which has been guaranteed under the Indian Constitution, is denied to these tribal communities. It is also to understand that tribals live in a symbiotic relationship with the environment or the forest, and many of them are largely nature worshippers. So the issue of religious freedom being compromised can be highlighted as a second ethical issue in this case. The third ethical issue in this case is the issue of cheating. For example, under this article, it is mentioned that a compensation for the relocation was promised at 7 lakh rupees. This was later transformed to 3 lakh rupees. And once it was inquired by the reporters on the ground, using the illiteracy that is prevalent among the tribal communities, only 3,000 rupees were given in the name of 3 lakh rupees. So the low levels of education have not only weakened the voice of the people, but has pronounced phenomena of cheating against them, wherein the 7 lakh which was originally promised as a relocation amount, but the end result is that only 3,000 rupees were available. Another ethical issue that can be highlighted here is the failure of the state machinery to deliver its promise. That is, the report highlights that forest department has promised people who are living in this area that any person who is 18 years and above would be eligible for compensation. But a particular family wherein 3 adults had been eligible for compensation, only compensation was provided to one of the adult beneficiaries. And this highlights the failure of the forest department or the government machinery to ensure the due promises that it has made. At last, It is also a failure of government machinery because various laws that provide protection to the people of the particular community have been breached here. The first such act is the Recognition of Forest Right Act of 2006, which calls for that no member of forest dwelling scheduled tribe or other traditional forest dwellers shall be evicted or removed till the recognition and verification procedure is complete. But in this case, this was breached. It also highlights the failure of right to fair compensation, transparency in land acquisition, rehabilitation and resettlement act of 2013. Because this act provides for the consultation with local self-government or the Gram Sabha. And this process was adopted to make the system more humane, participative and to ensure transparent and informed decision making. But this rule is also breached in the particular case. The last act which has been breached in this particular case is the PESA Act of 1996, which provides for the Gram Sabha or the Panchayats to be consulted before making the acquisition of land in these areas, that is the scheduled areas, or to undertake any development projects in these areas. But this consultative process with the local Gram Sabha or local self-government unit is again breached and violated in this case. So not only the legal dimension, but the constitutional obligations of right to religious freedom, cheating in the matters of compensation, and the loss of public trust are some of the key ethical issues that this particular case highlights. Moving on to the next article of the day that has featured on page 13 of the Hindu, basically talks about the visit by the Chinese President Xi Jinping to Russia that is about to happen on March 20th. Now, this visit is critically important at this point of time as China in the recent time has been able to increase its diplomatic clout by restoring diplomatic relationship between Iran and Saudi. Now, the article explains that China has always believed in the political dialogue and dialogue as the only way to resolve the conflict as well as the disputes. Now, this topic is important from the GS2 perspective of our UPSC mains examination. From this article, we will try to understand how China and Russia have come together. What is the present status of partnership between China and Russia? What are the challenges of relationship between China and Russia? And whether the growing bonhomie between China and Russia will have an implication on India, as Russia is one of the oldest ally of India. Now, if we try to understand the article, the historical evolution of ties between Russia and China can be said to be multi-layered and complex, with a side of strong geopolitical alignment against a unipolar West-dominated world order. The relationship between the erstwhile USSR and that of China was that of mistrust, hostility, and different ideological affinity. Though USSR and China both at that time had communist regime and have a mutual collaboration in the initial years after China got independence, wherein the USSR provided the initial support to China. But things between USSR and China started to get bitter when the Chinese economy started to open itself. And this opening of Chinese economy was taken under by Deng Xiaoping. And after this opening of Chinese economy, border confrontation emerged between the two neighbors. The relationship between USSR and China began to repair in the year of 1989 towards the end of the Cold War. The relationship between the two countries started to improve after Mikhail Gorbachev came to power and paid a state visit to China in 1989. And things started to improve rapidly after the end of Cold War with the disintegration of USSR, with now much weaker Russia was looking for new partners, and this disintegration of USSR paved the way for mutual cooperation between China and Russia. We'll now try to understand the timeline again. Post 1991, the two countries demarcated land borders and resolved the disputes over territories of Abagitu Islet, Bolshoi Island, and disputed region in the Vladivostok region. And in 1992, the two countries declared that they were pursuing a constructive partnership, and in 1996 raised the level to the strategic partnership. The two countries also signed the Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation in 2001, wherein the main ingredient of this treaty was mutual respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity for each other, non-aggression and non-interference in each other's internal affairs as the broad guidelines. So we have seen how the relationship between USSR and China have taken a complete U-turn. We started with a very positive note, wherein the USSR and China first had a very cordial relationship. The things started to get bitter when the Chinese economy was opened up under Deng Xiaoping. And again with the disintegration of USSR, the things started to change for a positive note. The present status of Chinese and Russian relationship today is identified by growing ideological affinity. And this ideological affinity is particularly with regard with the rewriting of the global order and the shared opposition to the United States supremacy on global stage. The relationship between the two countries has transformed. And two countries in 2022 under the Beijing Declaration have signed a partnership without limits and with no forbidden areas. And this Beijing Declaration came at a time when Russia in Ukraine war was about to begin. The Beijing Declaration laid down a foolproof blueprint for political, economic and military cooperation, showcasing a common front against the West. Now that we have seen the timeline of relationship between USSR and China and later between Russia and China, we'll try to understand the areas of cooperation between Russia and China today. The main form of cooperation between the two countries is in the field of economic relations. The economic relation between Russia and China in the field of trade is very important. From the year of 2003 till today, that is 2023, the mutual trade between the two countries have improved by more than 7 times. And the increase has been more post 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea. The two countries have entered into a $400 billion gas deal wherein Russia will supply gas to China for the next 30 years. In 2022 only, the two countries also signed the Power of Siberia 2 agreement. We have seen that the trade between Russia and China started to increase post 2014 dramatically. And the trade between the two countries post 2016 have almost tripled. And China has now emerged as the largest trading partner for Russia. The two countries further are in the advanced stages of formally linking Chinese Belt and Road Initiative with that of Russia's Eurasian Economic Union. Diplomatically, Russia has reaffirmed its support for the One China principle, and similarly, China has also backed Russia's stand on expansion on Western military alliances in Europe. In the field of defense cooperation also, the two countries have been strengthening their partnership, wherein the Russia has sold advanced fighter aircraft, that is the Sukhoi 35 fighter jets to China, and advanced missile system to the Chinese side, wherein S-400 missile defense system have been sold to China. During the last year, that is during the Russia-Ukraine war, China has continued to buy discounted Russian energy, and the two countries are further aiming to make transactions in rubles or Chinese renminbi owing to the Western sanction post the Russian-Ukraine war. So now that we have seen the areas of cooperation between Russia and China, we also need to understand the areas of discontent between the two countries. It is not that the Russian and Chinese relationship today are free of all the impediments. There are key differences between the relationship of Russia and China. The first key difference is that there is no formal security alliance between China and Russia, and the ideological affinity that we see today is purely transactional in nature, meaning thereby the ideological affinity is against a common enemy of United States of America and the unipolar world order that has emerged post disintegration of USSR. And thus scholars have identified that this ideological affinity is completely transactional and time bound. The second area of difference between Russia and China is that Russian position economically has weakened post the Ukrainian war. and Russia is now only 1/10 the size of Chinese economy, and to treat Russia as an equal partner for China will be very difficult. Though the two countries diplomatically support each other, wherein we have seen the Chinese support for Russia against the Western expansion of militarism in Europe, but China has still not ratified Crimean accession to Russia. And Russia, on the other hand, wants to regain its lost glory of the global power or superpower of USSR, and Russia thus will not be willing to subscribe to a junior partner status. Further, economically, we have seen that Russian economy is 1/10 the size of Chinese economy. And on the other hand, China is the European Union's largest trading partner, and it will not compromise on its economic interest. Similarly, for Russia also, Europe is very important, and the trade with Europe is much more rewardable. The recent Russian-Ukraine war has also complicated the relationship between China and Russia. Ukraine forms a critical part of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, and China will never compromise on the larger geo-economic interest in this region in order to support Russia. Further, China has been upset in the recent time with the Russian-Ukraine war. The issue is that the Russian victory in Europe, particularly against Ukraine, would have a dramatic impact on Asia too, meaning thereby the Russian victory would have reinforced the sentiment that United States of America and its power is in terminal decline, would have weakened the US alliances in Asia, and could have boosted Chinese ambition to radically reshape the periphery with regard with Taiwan, or that also in case of India. But due to over-dramatic stretch of Russian-Ukrainian war, wherein the Russian side has not been able to achieve the goals, the Chinese dependence and confidence in Russia has decreased. Further, the Ukrainian war has led to facilitation of Western unity under the American leadership. The Russian-Ukrainian war has further triggered the fear of Chinese territorial expansionism in Asia, and this has led to US strengthening its relationship with bilateral alliances with Australia and that of Japan. Now, even Berlin and Tokyo are now committed to raising their defense spending, particularly against aggressive Moscow and Beijing. And the Chinese firms also aren't much excited about stepping up business with Russia, because they fear secondary sanctions that could be applied on them, and Chinese firms do not want to risk by taking their business up with Russia. But this does not mean that China is not committed to Russia. Russia is a strategic partner for China in its fight against the United States of America. On the other hand, Russia is more dependent on China now than ever before, both politically as well as economically, and Vladimir Putin's willingness to openly challenge the United States of America still holds great appeal for Beijing. Now that we have analyzed the relationship where we have seen the cooperation and the areas of conflict between Russia and China, we'll try to understand the impact on India of this growing relationship between Russia and China. Now, the Sino-Russian alliance puts India in a terrible predicament, as China can anytime ramp up the military pressure on the disputed border with India. And India is heavily dependent on the Russian military supplies, which is in turn a junior partner of China. Further, the Russian partnership was seen as a key for Indian strategic autonomy, but the Indian dependence on Moscow in the field of defense is now seen as the biggest constraint on the India's freedom of action. Further, Russia openly opposes Quad, and Russia aligns itself with the Chinese claim of Quad being aimed at containing China. Russia also is a critical of the term Indo-Pacific and believes it is a step back towards the Cold War era and Cold War mentality. Further, India's continued alliance with the United States of America and its allies to restore the regional balance of power in the Indo-Pacific region has further boosted the partnership between the Russia and China. That is, it has further boosted the Sino-Russian alliance, which has complicated India's relationship with Russia. So, with this we have seen what will be the impact of growing bonhomie between Russia and China on India. We have also discussed the areas of cooperation and conflict between Russia and China. and analyze the relationship between Russia and China. Moving on to the next article of the day that has featured on page 1 of the Hindu, basically talks about the textile parks. Now, the center has selected sites in Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Karnataka, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, and UP to set up new textile parks. Now, this step is taken after 1.5 years when the PM Mega Integrated Textile Regions and Apparel Scheme was announced, which is also known as PM Mitra scheme for the textile sector. Through this article, we will try to understand the PM Mitra scheme in brief. Also, we will try to understand the Indian textile industry, its contribution, the issues that the textile industry in India currently faces, and what government steps have been taken in this regard, and what further can be done to improve the position of textile sector in India. Now, this topic is important from the GS3 perspective as it talks about the Indian economy and the issues related to growth, development, and that of employment. Further, as the textile sector is a labor-intensive industry, it also addresses the issues of inclusive growth by providing the job opportunity, and thus this topic becomes important for us. First, we will try to understand the PM Mitra scheme in short. Now, when this scheme was announced, it was labeled that PM Mitra parks would come up in Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Gujarat, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, and that of Maharashtra. And now we have seen that the sites have been selected for the same purpose. The inspiration behind the scheme comes from the idea of 5F vision that was given by Honorable Prime Minister, which provided from farm to fiber, to factory, to fashion, and then to foreign. And the scheme earmarked 70,000 crores to be invested and to generate an employment of 20 lakh. The focus of the scheme when it was announced was to generate integrated textile value chains, which will involve integration right from the beginning, spinning, weaving, processing, and the printing of the garment at a single location. And the objective was to produce world-class industrial infrastructure that would attract not only technology but also boost FDI, generation of textile value chain that will reduce the logistic cost of the industry, and the center and state to form special purpose vehicle in joint venture mode for setting up PM Mitra Park. Now, it was also announced under the scheme that there will be incentive for the Mitra Parks. Capital support to the tune of 30% of the project cost in greenfield or brownfield parks would be provided for creation of core infrastructure, for example, for developing of factory sites, plug and play facility, road, power, water, etc. to these locations. So there was clause of incentives in the form of capital support for the core infrastructure also under the scheme. Now that we have discussed what was PM Mitra scheme in brief, we will try to understand the issues that the textile industry in India today faces. Before discussing the issues that the textile industry in India currently faces, we will try to understand the contribution. Now, textile industry in India contributes roughly to the 2% of the GDP. It contributes 12% to the exports earning and accounted for 5% of the global trade. Now, another thing to understand about textile industry in India is that Indian textile industry is the second largest producer of man-made fiber in the world only after China, and is also sixth largest exporter of textiles and apparel in the world. So, the fact sheet for the Indian textile industry, its contribution to the GDP and the ranking in matters of production and export at the level of world is quite high. Still, textile industry in India faces some critical issues. The first such issue is the shortage in supply of raw material. Now, the cost of the basic raw material in the recent time has risen. And this is due to the closing down of units in China as well as in Europe, due to the high pollution that these industries were producing. Apart from the basic raw material cost that was increased due to these factors, weather also acts as an important factor in increasing the cost of basic raw material, which ultimately transforms into a shortage. The second challenge that textile industry in India faces is the cost, which we have already discussed, and it is due to unpredictable market condition, weather, policies of the government, which has caused the increase in the cost of raw material. The third issue that the textile industry in India currently faces is the issue of environment problem. Now the environmental problem is not a top priority for the textile industry in India, and this is surely not the concern of importers of this industry, which often puts textile industry in India against the larger environmental concerns. The next issue that the textile industry in India faces is the issue of infrastructural bottlenecks. Now, India still lags behind as it has low quality of infrastructure and lags behind other Asian countries even when compared to that of Bangladesh or that of Vietnam, which have much larger units of production when compared to India, and such larger units of production ensures more production, which will ultimately bring down the cost of production for these countries, that is Bangladesh and Vietnam, due to the simple concept of economies of scale. So India, due to its infrastructural bottlenecks, faces from the high cost of production, which ultimately causes the production in India to decline, which ultimately causes the cost to increase, and India lags behind on the economies of scale. And this is the reason that there is a decline in apparel exports. Due to the small size of the manufacturing units in India, the cost when compared to that of the good produced in Bangladesh or Vietnam is relatively high. And this introduces stiff competition, that is Bangladesh and that of Vietnam, which not only have large units but also have lower input costs, which ultimately makes Indian exports uncompetitive. So now that we have seen the contribution of textile sector to Indian economy and the issues that the textile industry in India currently faces, we'll try to understand what initiatives have the government taken in this regard. The first initiative that the government took to overcome such problem is in the field of foreign direct investment. Now, the government provides for 100% foreign direct investment in the textile sector via automatic route. The next step that the government of India has taken to improve the position of textile sector in India is the launch of National Textile Mission. The National Textile Mission has been proposed to improve the position of textile sector in India and its contribution to the Indian GDP, and was initiated in the year 2020 to be continued till 2024. Government of India has also announced new textile policy in the year 2020, which provides a comprehensive roadmap for the textile sector in India to ensure its meaningful contribution. The Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs, that is the CCEA, has asked for mandatory packaging of food grains or sugar in jute material bags to ensure that the jute industry and the textile industry in particular have a positive turnaround. Government of India, as a measure of next step, has also amended Technology Upgradation Fund scheme and has invested 95,000 crore rupees under this technology upgradation scheme, and such intervention has generated employment opportunity for India. The Government of India has also announced Integrated Wool Development Program, or the IWDP, and this is to provide support to the wool sector from the very beginning, that is from the wool rearer to the customer end, with an aim to enhance quality and increase production. At last, government has also launched the capacity building initiative, wherein the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs has approved the skill development program which was announced as a scheme for capacity building in the textile sector to ensure that the textile contribution in the Indian GDP increases. And this brings us to the last part of our discussion, that what further can be done to improve the Indian textile industry. So the first roadmap to make textile industry or to improve textile industry in India is to make it competitive in the global market, and this can be done via technology upgradation and expanding of the weaving capacity, support from center as well as the state government, and the state government to ensure creation of an enabling environment, and the state government should provide approval in one place, which includes provisions for the treatment plants, weaving, spinning, dyeing, and the transfer to the end consumer. With this, we have seen what is PM Mitra scheme, the contribution of textile sector in India to the GDP, the issues that the textile industry in India currently faces, initiatives that the government have taken in this regard, and at the end we have also seen what more needs to be done to make textile industry of India number one. Moving on to the next article of the day, the article has featured on page 13 of the Hindu and basically talks about the International Criminal Court that had issued an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin. Now, the International Criminal Court has held Vladimir Putin responsible for the war crimes of unlawful deportation of population, especially children, and unlawful transfer of population from occupied areas of Ukraine to the Russian Federation. And this clearly has been identified as a violation of the Rome Statute. Basically, these children were taken away from the orphanages and child care homes, and many of these children have been given adoption in the Russian Federation. Law was changed in Russia by the presidential decrees to expedite the Russian citizenship on these children. Now, this article further explains that the war crimes were allegedly committed in Ukrainian occupied territory by the Russian forces. Now, this topic is also important, and Russia is not the member of the International Criminal Court. While the International Criminal Court is itself not a United Nations organization, the court has a cooperation agreement with United Nations. When a situation is not within the court jurisdiction, the United Nations Security Council can refer a situation to ICC. So this topic becomes important from the perspective of prelims examination and falls under the GS2 section for our mains examination. The first thing to understand here is that UNSC can refer a situation to the International Criminal Court. During our discussion, we will try to understand International Criminal Court, the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court as explained under the Rome Statute. We will also discuss about the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols, and the jurisdiction of International Criminal Court with respect to the state parties as the last part of our discussion. First thing to understand here is about the International Criminal Court. Now, the International Criminal Court investigates and tries individuals charged with the gravest crime of concern to the international community, whether it is related to genocide, war crimes, and crime against humanity or crime of aggression. And ICC came into existence by the Rome Statute, which established ICC as the world's first permanent international criminal court. So the first thing to understand here is that ICC is the world's first permanent international criminal court and was established through Rome Statute. Now, ICC aims to end impunity through international criminal justice system. Further, it is to understand here that ICC seeks to complement and not to replace the national courts. And the seat of the ICC is placed in Hague, Netherlands. So we have seen basics about the International Criminal Court. Now we will try to understand what is the jurisdiction as provided under the Rome Statute of ICC. Now the ICC jurisdiction is as under four main cases. The first is the crime of genocide. Now this genocide is characterized by intent to destroy a part or whole of national, ethnic, racial or religious groups by killing its members or by other means. This can also involve serious body or mental harm to the members of the group. Imposition of measures intended to prevent births within the group or forcibly transferring of children of the group to another group is also understood as a crime of genocide. The second area of jurisdiction under ICC is the crime against humanity. Now these are regarded as a serious violation against any civilian population, and 15 forms of crime are listed under the Rome Statute, which include offenses like that of murder, rape, enslavement, imprisonment, torture, apartheid, etc. The third case of ICC jurisdiction is related to the war crimes. Now the war crimes under which an arrest warrant have been issued against Vladimir Putin are the grave breaches of Geneva Convention. Now this is in context with the armed conflict, and this includes examples of use of child soldiers, killing or torture of persons such as civilians or prisoners of war, intentional attacks on hospitals, historic monuments or buildings that are dedicated to religion, school, etc. And the fourth case, as under the Rome Statute of ICC jurisdiction, consists of crimes of aggression. Now, these consist of use of armed force by a state against the sovereignty and integrity of another state. And this definition of crime was adopted by amending the Rome Statute in 2010. So, we have seen the four main cases of the ICC jurisdiction, that includes crime of genocide, crime against humanity, which include 15 forms of crime, war crimes under which Vladimir Putin has been charged, and the crime of aggression, whose definition was amended in 2010 and includes use of armed force by a state against integrity and sovereignty of another state. Now, we have seen that the war crimes are the grave breaches of the Geneva Convention, and thus we need to understand what basically Geneva Convention are, as this can also be asked in the prelims examination. Now, Geneva Convention and the additional protocols are international treaties that contain the most important rules which seeks to limit barbarity of a war. To put a limitation on the barbarity of a war, Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols come handy, as they protect people who do not take part in the fighting and those who can no longer fight. The first Geneva Convention protects the wounded and the sick soldiers, and first Geneva Convention protects soldiers on land. The second Geneva Convention also protects the wounded and the sick soldiers at sea. The third Geneva Convention applies to prisoners of war. The fourth Geneva Convention accords protection to civilians. The common article covers situation of non-international armed conflict. Non-international armed conflict meaning thereby are situations like that of civil war within the country or that of internal armed conflict that may spill over into other states, or the internal conflict in which third states or multinational force intervene alongside with the government. Further, the additional protocols to Geneva Convention have also been added. The first additional protocol protects the victims of international armed conflict. The second additional protocol protects the victim of non-international armed conflict. And the third additional protocol creates an additional emblem, that is the red crystal. And this red crystal has the same international status as the Red Cross and Red Crescent emblems. With this, we have seen the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols, basically which are the rules to prevent the barbarity of a war by putting limitations, which we have seen in the form of protection to international and non-international armed conflict, as well as protection to soldiers that are involved in the war and to the civilian who are not involved in the war. Now we will discuss the last part of our article, that Russia is not a member of the ICC. Moreover, apart from Russia, no big powers are the member of the ICC. For example, US is not a member of ICC. India is not a member of ICC. China is also not a member of ICC. Then how does the jurisdiction applies with respect to the state parties? Now the first thing to understand here is that 123 countries world over are state parties to the Rome Statute. That is, a state which becomes a party to the Rome Statute accepts the jurisdiction of ICC. Now the first thing to understand here is that ICC has jurisdiction only with the respect to crimes that are committed after the entry into the force of this statute, that is the Rome Statute. Only the crimes that are committed after the signing of Rome Statute, ICC has jurisdiction over. Another thing to understand here is that ICC can exercise jurisdiction only with respect to the crimes that are committed once a state enters into the Rome Statute, or unless the state had made a declaration for that effect. Another thing to understand here is that ICC may exercise the jurisdiction if one or more of the following states are the parties to this statute or have accepted the jurisdiction of ICC. And the ICC jurisdiction will apply not only to the territory of which the conduct is in question, but will also apply to a vessel or aircraft and the state of registration of that vessel or aircraft. Further, the ICC jurisdiction will also apply to the state of which the person accused of the crime is a national. Further, the next thing to understand here is that in case of a state which is not a party to the ICC, for example, the case of Ukraine. Now, Ukraine was not a party to the ICC. In such a case, when state is not a party to ICC, it may by declaration accept the jurisdiction of ICC. For example, we have seen the case of Ukraine. It was not a party to ICC, but it has accepted the jurisdiction of ICC throughout its territory from 2014. That is, when the annexation of Crimea took place, Ukraine has accepted the jurisdiction of ICC throughout its territory. Thus, the last thing to understand under the jurisdiction of ICC is that International Criminal Court exercises jurisdiction in situation of genocide, crime against humanity, or war crimes that happened after 1st of July 2002. Now, these crimes could have been committed by a state national party in the territory of a state party, meaning thereby those who were the party to the ICC from 2002, or even in a state that has accepted the jurisdiction of ICC. For example, in the present case, Ukraine was not a state party of ICC, but from 2014 onward, it has accepted the jurisdiction of ICC. Hence, ICC has the jurisdiction in particular case, despite Russia being not a member of the ICC. Further, in the very beginning, we have also discussed that crimes were referred to the ICC prosecutor by the United Nations Security Council. Thus, it is also clear that the United Nations Security Council can refer the matter to ICC. With this, we have seen the jurisdiction of ICC, which big countries are not the part of ICC. From when the jurisdiction of ICC began, we have also seen that Ukraine was not a state party to the ICC statute, but later adopted it in 2014 after the Crimean annexation took place, and how Russia, despite being not a member to the ICC, then also the jurisdiction has extended to this. During our discussion, we have also seen the basics of the International Criminal Court, the Rome Statute that grants jurisdiction of International Criminal Court over 4 main cases, and we have also understood under the Geneva Convention, which are specifically related to the war crimes.